What we're looking at here today is a photo from the 1800s. It's in the archives of the Nova Scotia Archives of Halifax, Nova Scotia. It's incredible how we can preserve the past to see it today. As we can appreciate, there's a Mi'kmaq family here sitting in front of their wigwam. And there's quite a story behind the history of the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia, and that's who I'm specifically focusing on, even though they were in other areas like Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, and various other locations. But my interest is in Nova Scotia for various reasons, because I was born in Tatamagouche, Nova Scotia, lived in Truro, Nova Scotia, that's where I grew up, basically speaking. And then I moved to Bedford, Nova Scotia at a later time. And also, there's been a lot of talk about the Mi'kmaq people on the subject of Oak Island, Nova Scotia during the last few years. And that's something that's of interest to me as well. So, the history behind, very brief, the history behind the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia is that many thousands of years ago, the Mi'kmaq people made their home in the area of what is known today as Nova Scotia. And the earliest traces of their culture have been found in what is known as De Burt, near the Bay of Fundy, Cobequid Bay. And it is claimed that that particular site dates back 10,000 years ago. There's been a lot of archaeological studies going on there over the years. I remember when it was discovered. A lot of artifacts that come out of there. It was the old military base, probably where they put down the pavement for maybe landing helicopters or whatever, airplanes, trucks going over it. They covered over a lot of this campsite, but yet enough survived on the outskirts and in the wooded areas around that military base that they were able to determine that it was a Mi'kmaq site, even though that was very controversial at first. But what I'm reading now, it's claimed to be of their origin. They lived as a Semitic nomadic lifestyle, meaning they traveled and roamed originally when they came down from what was the melting of the ice that followed what's referred to as the Ice Age, and they made their way into Nova Scotia as they moved from place to place in search of food and resources. So in doing so, they developed their own distinct lifestyle, clothing, language, and writing system. Whatever they had was of their origin, and they brought it with them. As we well know, the Mi'kmaq have carved in stone various stories that have been passed down through the ages by their oral tradition. Now, the oral tradition is word of mouth, stories that were told over the ages for thousands of years. They carved these stories into stone, and they related to them to many of the early explorers, and specifically in the 1800s, there was particular individuals that became very interested in recording these stories on paper, these legends as we refer to them, and that's why we have them today. These legends were, of course, told to many of the early settlers, like the Portuguese, the Basque, the English, the French, as they came over to the New World, specifically after 1492, and there's been a lot of debate that other voyagers might have come this way, and we do know the Norsemen, the Vikings, had a small settlement in the upper part of Newfoundland. Now, we're going to go to a photo here of the stone carving located in the Bedford Barrens area of Nova Scotia. I talked about this a number of times in my videos, and as you all may know by now, I was quite involved in helping to protect those two petroglyphs. This is a photo that I had taken a few years ago when I was in Nova Scotia. I'm living in Austria now, and it was a wet day, thankfully, so I was able to capture the markings and lines that are on this. It's referred to as an 8-pointed star, And as we can see, the central part is like a swirling motion going on here. We can see different lines. I'm going to show a little short video I made, and you'll see a better tracing of this. There's another petroglyph. I don't have the photo with me here, but it's off to the just off to the side of this one, and you'll see a tracing of that one as well. Now, the story behind this and my involvement with bringing about the protection of these glyphs, these stone carvings of the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia, all took place during the year of 1990. I was invited to serve as a member of a committee to possibly bring about the protection of those two Mi'kmaq petroglyphs that are located, as mentioned, in the Bedford Barrens area. That was a three-member committee, and we were named the Bedford Barrens Petroglyph Advisory Committee. At that time, the mayor of Bedford was Peter Kelly, and Len Groucher was involved with the political activities at that time, but he was the chairman of this committee. We'll say that right, Groucher. After 2 years of going over this information, many challenging meetings, the three of us, along with Len, brought about the protection of these two petroglyphs, and they were placed under what's referred to as the Special Place Act of Nova Scotia. So that means they're looked after and protected from all changes that could have taken place in that area of Bedford, and for sure there was going to be development in there, and those glyphs would have been wiped out and destroyed for all time if we hadn't stepped in. At various times over the years, various groups of people have made different claims about this particular glyph, but I'm not getting into that right now here today. I'm very satisfied. The real message behind these carvings is that the Mi'kmaq were saying, we were here. That's all I'm going to say on this today. That part of it, as far as deciphering what might be seen or not seen in those glyphs. I have a video here that I made, and this is just a short little clip from it. And this is the pathway they have now in Bedford that takes you to the glyphs. I have a longer video. I'll put the name of that video under here later so you can go see the whole video on YouTube. For now, I'm just going to show you a clip of that, and then we'll come back to these pictures in a minute. So it'll just take a second or two, and we'll bring this up. And
It was a committee that lasted for 2 years to bring about the protection of what we're going to look at here in a few minutes. The two carvings here in the Barrens that were carved by the Mi'kmaq people. We eventually did bring about the protection of these glyphs. They've been dated to be, I believe, about 500 years old. Unfortunately, I'm looking at a lot where I think what's going to happen here, these will disappear in time. There's an AI here. I don't recall ever seeing that on this stone carving when we part with the protection. I'm positive of that. You look at the original tracings of this, you won't find those there. Here's the other over here. Now, there are ways to bring this back to life with water, shadows, the sun, the angles. It might look really worn here. They always did appear to be worn or not that visible. So there are some beautiful photos on the internet and in various other places that bring those two glyphs back to life. So I'm very pleased that I had a hand in that and bringing that about. In 1992, then I moved from that point to spent many, many hours up here. And it's very seldom I'll show myself. Actually, I've never shown myself in any of the videos that I've done, but I guess I should put a face to the story. I got a bit of a sore throat, so that's not helping matters. The camera on myself, because the story is not really about me, but I thought maybe this time let you folks know who the voice, the face behind the voice. There's not much left of my voice, but seeing where I traveled to Austria in 2010, this may be my 5th or 6th trip back and forth. This could be my last trip, so that's why I'm making this video. I'm going to spend a bit of extra time. You can see fall coming in here, and here's what the actual traces look like. Other than this one, there's no letter, what appear to be an A or a V, Roman number 4. It's not there. That was added later, unfortunately. That's damaged. And there's the man petroglyph. And I'm not going to read into what he might mean or might not mean. I'm going to leave that to the Mi'kmaq people. And I am just
So that's the video. Certainly a lot clearer on my original video. This is kind of like a copy that I'm making here today, just to give you a look at the situation there. You can see that it's kind of a rough area. The carvings, unfortunately, are just almost disappearing. They're still there. There needs to be more protection put around those carvings, a fence, or I don't know what, a dome of some sort, plexiglass, whatever might prevent people from walking right on top of them. As you can see, you can walk right over them if you're not careful. So that's the story, and if you want to go to that site, you'll see that there's these writings that you can read the story on. And of course on the internet there's lots of information. So now we're going to go over and going to discuss with you a few points about the Big Dipper in the night sky, the constellations. Just take me a second here, see if I can just find that photo without too much problem. There we go, we got to go down to the bottom, I think. Let's hope we can bring it up here without too much trouble. So we saw this here. There we go. This is one of many ancient old maps showing the constellations in the night sky, and the Mi'kmaq people in their oral tradition speak of what's referred to as the Big Dipper as being the bear. And it's part of the Ursa Major constellation, part of it. And then we have Ursa Minor. So there's a legend that goes behind this, and it's called Moen and the Seven Hunters. And Moen, if I'm saying that correctly, is the bear. And, you know, in many other countries, the Big Dipper is referred to as a wagon, a pot, a teapot, or a pot for water, a dipper, you know. And, you know, all kinds of other interpretations by various people around the world. And over here in Austria, where I'm living now, it's referred to as a wagon. I'm not going to get into great details about it. In the oral tradition of the Mi'kmaq, for thousands of years, they would tell stories and tell these stories to the children. The chief would tell the stories, the leaders, the men, the parents, the mother, and tell the children the stories. And these stories had a lot of meaning to them, a lot of teachings, a lot of principles, a lot of things not to violate. You know, they slanted towards goodness, even though there was sometimes danger. So instead of me trying to explain all the details here today, I'm going to take a little clip out of another YouTube video, and it's named The Night Sky, Tales of Dipper. the Dipper. And I'm going to write that down below. I'm going to have it below my video here so you can go look it up. And the reason why I'm doing this, because I really don't believe I can really capture the feeling of it as is showing in this educational video. And I believe that's what educational videos are for, to teach, the same as the Mi'kmaq were teaching with their oral tradition, their word of mouth that was passed down and preserved things in great detail. So we're going to go back to another video. This just take a couple seconds here. And this is the one I'm referring to. And we'll see what we got here. There we go.
To Mi'kmaq tradition, the 4 stars in the bowl of the Dipper represents the bear, while the 3 stars of the Dipper's handle are the hunters. But these aren't human hunters, they're 3 birds. The star closest to the handle is robin. The middle star is chickadee, while moosebird, otherwise known as the gray jay, brings up the rear. Our story begins in the springtime, when the celestial bear wakes from hibernation and crawls forth from its winter den. The 3 friends begin their hunt, and finally, by the time fall arrives, they manage to catch up to the bear. Robin shoots the bear with an arrow, and during the struggle, he gets a lot of blood on his feathers. He shakes most of it off, and it falls to the earth, only to stain the fall foliage with red. Try as he might, Robin cannot get rid of the red that stains his breast. The bear dies from his wound, and the 3 friends cook the bear in a great pot. As the fat bubbles over the sides of the pot, it too falls from the sky and stains the leaves yellow.
So that's the story. Quite interesting, isn't it? It's amazing what we can do with technology these days. And in that legend, oral tradition, it mentioned moose bird, who is known as a gray jay. The chickadee, like a chick, would be a very small bird. Robin, because of its reddish star. Then there was number 4 bird that wasn't mentioned in this video. Blue jay, number 5 was, if I can say this right, sawat. And number 6, the owl. And number 7, pigeon. Now, robin, it's very interesting because it mentions robin because it is a reddish star. In other words, the Mi'kmaq with the naked eye were able to pick out colors in some of the stars. They could differentiate between the stars, and some of them had different shades of colors, blues or whites or whatever it might be, but specifically a red color was noticeable by them. They didn't have telescopes like we do today. They had the naked eye and a keen sense of the universe around them. So that pretty well brings that part of it to a close as far as showing these videos. Now I'm going to go to the Google Earth star chart, and we're going to take a look at the constellations in the night sky. And what we see here is the, just get rid of a few things here, there we go. This is the Big Dipper here, part of Ursa Major. I'm just going to go back a little bit here. I'm not going to get into too much detail. And what is interesting here, we can just find, I got these red lines. I'm working on different projects. Oak Island appears to be located right now under the Lynx constellation. These marks are pinpointing Oak Island, but I'm going to get into this a little deeper at another time. It's a little bit confusing. There's some things I have to sort out, but I found this tonight quite interesting. I just came across this by accident, you could say. I mean, I had things marked out, but I just didn't take note of it. So that's Ursa Major here, and let's see what else we can pick up here. This is the marking of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And once again, we're not going to get into that either. Hercules over here. And here's Ursa Minor, the Small Dipper, Little Dipper. And there's Draca. And here's the North Star right here. But back in the Egyptian times, the North Star was known as Thuban. And I think I picked it up here somewhere. Just going to see if we can find it now. Then we'll bring this video to a close soon. We're going to return to Oak Island. We're going to return to Nova Scotia. We got different things here going on at once, but okay, I'm not going to get too bogged down. I thought I'd spot it. Could be right here, I think. Thuban. Yeah, here we go. And I believe I'm saying that right. This was a North Star about 5,000, 6,000 years ago. Whenever the Great Pyramid of Giza was built, that's what they had to go by, Thuban. But at another time, I'm going to deal with that in greater detail. I just thought I'd point that out. I'm glad it wasn't too difficult here today to get that. I'm doing various projects, so you'll see different red lines. But what we'll do now, we're going to go back to planet Earth. Another time, I'll show you how all this works and how I was able to get up there with the constellations in the night sky. Take that a bit further. There we go. So we're going to go directly to Oak Island, if all goes well here. There we go. So here we have it, Oak Island, Nova Scotia, and we'll take it at a distance here. So to finish things off, just going to get our location set up here again. Nova Scotia. And I just want to show you where things are located, little distance shot. And so here's Tanamagush up in this general area of Nova Scotia, Truro here, and Bedford down here. And we'll take a look at the Mi'kmaq carvings. They're located right in here. Get a close look. We're not going to go right down to it necessarily. Let's see what we can come up with. Yeah, there's where it's carved. These are, I think I dealt with that in my last video. The Barrens, 500 to 600 million year old ocean bottom is what it is. They came to the surface. These are the Barrens. These are the buckles in the earth when the ocean rose to the surface and became exposed to sunlight and everything else. Here's where the petroglyphs are located, the Mi'kmaq petroglyphs. And I'm just going to tell a short story about Oak Island just before I close things down. George Young, who I used to talk to a lot on the phone in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and he passed away a few years later, not too much long. He lived down in Queensland, down through here, along the shore. And he had a theory that he published and told me about a few times. He had a little booklet, I forget what the name of it was. But he felt that maybe the Mi'kmaq knew about the location of Oak Island, even though I've never found a legend that spoke about it specifically by the Mi'kmaq. But he believed that maybe there was a crack in the earth, and that's where the Mi'kmaq brought the early settlers or explorers or whatever to this location because they told them about this crack in the earth. George had a belief that maybe Glooskap was entombed at the bottom of the pit, but I think we don't want to get into making up big stories. There's a lot of folklore, as we know, that's circulating around. And the thing about Glooskap, as I mentioned in my last video, he and his friend, younger brother, named Martin, lived in Cape Breton. But that was a story. I just wanted to relate it to you in case you ever heard of it. And then the explorers, whoever got involved with the island, started digging up that, really was a sinkhole is what it was originally, a crack in the earth. And that's the beginning of the unsolved mystery of Oak Island, Nova Scotia, the famous money pit. So here we have a sinkhole here. We're going to stop in about, just a very short time. I'll just show you one of the sinkholes right here. And the money pit is in this general area. So that was the beginning of how the mystery of Oak Island started out. So I'll leave you with those thoughts for now. Once again, we got to look at that as folklore. It's not a fact, it's a story. And stories can evolve into what people might think is a fact, which has happened over the last 200 years concerning the diggings that went on in Oak Island.